hadn't missed a single Sunday dinner in over 12 years. Through snowstorms, overtime audits, even hospital visits, I showed up, lasagna in hand, smile intact. My daughter used to say, "It's not Sunday without you, Mom." I held on to that, maybe too tightly, until the night I overheard her on the porch telling her mother-in-law, "Don't worry, my mom will pay. She always does." Calm, casual, like I was just a number on a spreadsheet. That lasagna? Still warm in my arms. Her words, still colder than anything winter ever managed. That was the night something in me cracked, not loud, just final. I didn't knock. I didn't say a word. I just walked away. And when I did, I took everything, every penny, every password, every trace of access to the life they thought they controlled. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about clarity and walking away, finally, for myself. There's a certain silence that settles in kitchens at dawn, a silence filled not with emptiness, but with intention. The clink of a spoon, the hum of an old fridge, the rhythm of a life lived in patterns. For 12 years, Marianne Keller had never broken that pattern. Every Sunday, without fail, she woke at 5. By 6, the sauce was simmering. By 8, the dough for garlic knots was rising under a towel that once belonged to her mother. Her daughter Olivia used to call it magic, the way the apartment filled with warmth. The smell of basil and roasted tomatoes curling through the hallway like a whisper of home. "You make the world stop on Sundays," she once told Marianne. And Marianne, foolishly perhaps, believed that mattered. Today was no different. Marianne stood in her modest kitchen, her back already aching, wrists sore from the early prep, but her hands steady. She wasn't cooking for applause. She never had. She cooked because love needed a language, and this was the one she spoke fluently. As the lasagna layers built, no ricotta, extra mozzarella, just the way Olivia liked, Marianne let herself wander back through years of Sundays. 8th grade, when Olivia failed her first math test and sobbed into her mother's apron. Marianne had made baked ziti that day, then sat on the floor with her daughter, feeding her stories until the tears stopped. College send-off with 3 trays of manicotti and a handwritten note tucked between layers of Tupperware. "You are more than enough, always." Olivia never mentioned that note. Not then, not ever. The food cooled on the counter as Marianne dressed. Nothing fancy, just a cardigan and the necklace Frank had given her the year before he left. She still wore it, not for him, but because it reminded her that once, someone had chosen her first. By the time she wrapped the lasagna, steam still kissed the foil. She packed it carefully, tucked napkins under the dish, checked the time. 4:36 p.m., like always. Punctual, reliable, unwavering. Outside, the sky had dipped into that soft blue-gray of early evening, and the road to Olivia's suburban home stretched familiar beneath her tires. Every crack in the curb, every tilt of a mailbox was muscle memory. Marianne had driven this route hundreds of times, her car practically steering itself. She didn't know yet that this drive would be her last. The neighborhood looked exactly as she remembered, trimmed hedges, wreaths still lingering from the holidays, and that pale yellow porch light Olivia always kept on. Marianne pulled up slowly behind Marcus's SUV, careful not to park near the cracked curb that had once caught her heel. That habit, like so many others, was carved from years of quiet devotion. She stepped out, lasagna in hand, the dish warm against her forearm. The scent was strong now, tangy and comforting. For a moment, she let herself imagine Olivia opening the door with a grin, calling her Ma the way she had as a little girl. Maybe tonight would feel like old times. Maybe there would be laughter, the kind that filled the space between courses and made silence feel like love. But as Marianne climbed the steps, her foot catching slightly on the 3rd one, always a little loose, she heard voices. Light, casual, familiar. "She'll pay for it," Olivia said, the words floating through the screen door with a clarity that struck like ice water. "She always does." Marianne froze. Darla's voice followed, smooth and amused. "Still covering your phone bill, too, isn't she? Must be nice." A soft chuckle. "You know, Mom," Olivia replied. "A little guilt and she's in." I was thinking of saying it's a roof issue. Maybe water damage. That'll get her moving. Darla laughed louder this time. Bless her. Some women just need to feel needed. Marianne's hand hovered inches from the door handle, trembling slightly. The lasagna's weight shifted in her arms, the heat still pressing into her ribs, grounding her in a moment that no longer belonged to comfort, but betrayal. Inside, she could hear the rustle of paper, a clink of glasses, the ordinary sounds of a family preparing dinner. A dinner she had made, a tradition she had built. And here they were, planning how to turn her kindness into currency. Not even with malice, just efficiency, like she was a line item in their budget. She didn't knock, didn't clear her throat, or step inside with a forced smile. She took one slow step back, then another, careful, deliberate. Her foot pressed lightly against that loose third step, avoiding the creak out of reflex. Everything felt surreal, like watching someone else's life unravel through the window of her own. By the time she reached the sidewalk, her knuckles were white from gripping the dish. She placed it in the passenger seat as gently as if it were still meant for someone she loved. She sat behind the wheel, the engine off, fingers frozen on the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed once, then again. Olivia, no doubt. She didn't check. She just stared ahead, the street stretching silent before her. This was the moment she would remember, not as the day she gave up on her daughter, but the moment she finally gave back to herself. She didn't cry on the drive home, not through the long stretch of highway that shimmered under flickering streetlights. Not even when she passed the diner where she and Olivia used to stop after piano recitals. Marianne kept her eyes steady on the road, her posture rigid, as if softening might cause everything to spill. The lasagna still smelled like home, garlic and tomato and the soft baked nostalgia of sacrifice. It filled the car like a memory that refused to let go. She parked outside her apartment without turning on the headlights. The building was quiet, most of her neighbors likely already asleep. She climbed the stairs slowly, her shoes leaving faint wet prints on the concrete. The lasagna stayed in the car. She couldn't bring it inside. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Inside, the apartment greeted her in silence. No TV, no music, just the ambient hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock that Olivia had given her years ago. She stood in the entryway without removing her coat, staring at the dim outlines of furniture she knew by heart. When did my love become their entitlement? The question floated in the dark, unspoken but deafening. She had given Olivia everything. College tuition, a down payment on their first home, the entire wedding cost when Marcus's family backed out last minute. She even sold her wedding jewelry, Frank's bangles, her grandmother's earrings, to ensure Olivia didn't graduate with debt. She told herself it was love, that parents do these things, that one day Olivia would understand and maybe even say thank you. But the thank yous never came. Instead, there were expectations, needs masked as assumptions, gratitude diluted into silence. She opened the fridge, not because she was hungry, but because she needed something to do with her hands. An old habit. There was a jar of olives she didn't remember buying, a carton of milk nearing expiration. She shut the door. Her body ached. Not from standing too long, not from the cooking, but from the accumulation of years carried in silence. Invisible weights pressed into her spine by the very people she loved most. She leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded tight. She wasn't angry. Not yet. Just hollow. A bone-deep emptiness that echoed louder than rage ever could. By the time she slipped off her coat and shoes, the realization had fully settled. She hadn't mattered as a person in that house for a long time, only as a provider, a safety net, a walking credit line with a soft voice and strong casseroles. She went to bed that night with the lights off and the lasagna still sitting in the car. No tears, just a quiet hum of clarity. Something had shifted, something that wouldn't shift back. Marianne woke before sunrise, though she hadn't slept much. Her body, trained by years of early starts and motherly habit, moved automatically. She brewed coffee, its bitter aroma thick in the quiet, and sat by the kitchen window, watching the river of headlights crawl along the distant freeway. Sunday morning had always been her favorite, slow, gentle, predictable. But now, the air felt different, like a door had closed somewhere deep inside her. She brought her laptop to the table, its screen casting a pale glow across the wood. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she began typing. First, she logged into her savings account. Olivia's name still sat there, a quiet presence, listed as emergency contact and secondary beneficiary. Marianne stared at it. The cursor blinked beside her daughter's name like it was waiting for her to let go. She clicked remove. One by one, she moved down the list. Retirement account, brokerage, health insurance, life insurance, all the little boxes she had once checked out of instinct, out of hope, out of trust. Unchecked, removed, reset. Next came passwords, banking, credit cards, cloud storage, family calendars. She changed every single one, enabling two-factor authentication, deleting the shared folders she and Olivia once used to coordinate birthday gifts and holiday plans. It wasn't out of anger, not even revenge, just safety. Marianne had finally understood how dangerous her trust had become. A folder on her desktop labeled Family Budget stared back at her. Inside were spreadsheets she'd maintained for years. Gift records, mortgage help, tax documents Olivia had asked for but never fully appreciated. She deleted it all. When her phone buzzed again, Olivia's name lit up. Marianne didn't answer. She didn't block the number, not yet, but she didn't open the message either. Not because she was unsure, but because she no longer felt obligated to. By afternoon, Marianne stood in front of her hallway mirror, brushing her hair back with slow, deliberate movements. She chose a blazer she hadn't worn in months and slipped on her low heels. Not for dinner, not for family, but for herself. There was one more stop she needed to make. She arrived at Diane Sinclair's office, a sharp woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes like flint. Her former colleague turned friend, turned something more reliable than family. Diane looked up from her desk and immediately waved her in. "You have 5?" Marianne asked. Diane motioned her to sit, closed the laptop, and folded her arms. "This isn't legal yet," Marianne said. "It's personal, but it might become both." Diane nodded once. No questions, just focus. Marianne drew a breath. The words poured out. Not angry, not theatrical, just honest. The lasagna, the porch, the voices, the years, the shift. When she finished, Diane didn't offer comfort. She offered truth. "You've always been sharper than you let on." Marianne gave a tired smile. Not sharp, just finally done being soft. Seattle wasn't part of the plan. Not really. It had always been a city Marianne admired from afar. Its water, its gray skies, the quiet resilience of a place always caught between rain and clarity. But when Diane mentioned the job opening, something inside her didn't flinch. It steadied. A regional finance coordinator position. Remote at first, then optional relocation. New team, new rules, no shared zip code with Olivia. She applied the next morning. The paperwork was simple. Her resume spoke for itself. 35 years in audit and risk, multiple certifications, spotless record. But this wasn't about credentials. It was about movement. And for the first time in years, she was moving for herself. As the offer letter pinged into her inbox later that week, Marianne sat back and stared at the screen. She hadn't felt proud in a long time, not in the way that reaches your bones and reminds you that you're still capable of starting again. She didn't forward the email to Olivia, didn't text Diane right away. She just sat with it, letting the reality stretch out around her like new skin. Then came the phone call. "Hi, Mom." Olivia's voice chirped like nothing had happened. "I was thinking maybe dinner this week, just the two of us. Catch up a little?" Marianne closed her eyes. She had prepared for this, rehearsed it even, but the familiar cadence of her daughter's voice still tugged at something ancient in her chest. "I can't," she said calmly. "I have something more important than family tomorrow." There was a pause, a breath, then a light chuckle. "Well, maybe later in the week. Nothing big." We just need to talk about a few things. Taxes, Wesley's quarterly stuff, She didn't respond. Olivia continued, her voice dipped in that familiar charm. We'd really appreciate your guidance. That's all. Marianne didn't flinch. You once said I'd melt when you cry, she said. Try me. Silence again. Not confusion, calculation. I don't know what you're talking about. You do, Marianne replied. You just didn't expect me to hear it. The line stayed quiet. Mom, you're being unfair. You're acting like I don't care, like I'm using you. You are, and you have been for years. That's not true. You told her I'd cover it, that I always do, like I'm an ATM with a casserole dish. A click of frustration from the other end. You're twisting. She ended the call. 15 minutes later, the name Darla lit up her screen. Marianne stared at the phone as it rang. Then, with the same clarity that had fueled every change that week, she answered. Celeste, Darla said, too warm. I think there's been a little misunderstanding. Marianne didn't respond right away. She let Darla fill the silence with her practiced concern. Talia's just under a lot of pressure, you know how it is. Mortgage, taxes, planning for the future. She may have said some things out of frustration, but you know she loves you. Marianne's fingers tightened around the mug she hadn't realized she was holding. She brought it to her lips, took a slow sip, and answered flatly, I'm not confused, Darla. There was a beat. Then Darla's tone shifted, still polite, but cooler, more condescending. This is just how family works. We help each other. You've always been the reliable one. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Marianne smiled without warmth. I'm not your bank. Excuse me? I'm her mother, and she stopped being my daughter the moment she started planning my generosity behind my back. Darla tried to speak again, but Marianne had already ended the call. That night, she didn't sleep. Not from worry, but from the clarity that often follows betrayal. She sat by her window, lights off, watching the shadows stretch and shift across her ceiling. Something inside her had gone quiet, something that used to bend and bend until it broke without sound. This time, she heard the break. The next day, she received a thick envelope at work, hand-delivered, unmarked, but heavy in that way shame often is, even when it isn't yours. The receptionist gave her an apologetic glance. He said it was personal. Wouldn't leave until I signed for it. Marianne nodded, took the envelope, and closed the door to her office. Inside, formal language, legal formatting, Times New Roman 12-point font. Olivia and Marcus were suing her. They claimed the money Marianne had given them, college tuition, wedding costs, down payment, emergency transfers, had all been verbal loans made with the expectation of repayment. They accused her of abandonment, emotional distress, and financial sabotage. There was even a line that read, her sudden withdrawal of familial support has destabilized our household income. For a long time, Marianne could only laugh, not from humor, but disbelief. The kind of laugh that leaks out when the absurdity becomes too much to bear. She picked up the documents, walked straight to Diane's office, and dropped them onto her desk. Diane flipped through them quickly, her expression unreadable until she exhaled sharply through her nose and leaned back. I know someone, she said. She's not cheap, but she's surgical. You'll need that. That same afternoon, Marianne met Gwen Lockatch. Gwen didn't ask many questions at first. She let Marianne talk about the lasagna, the betrayal, the years of sacrifice, the silence in Olivia's house, the noise in her own mind. When she finished, Gwen tapped the envelope once and said, They don't want your money. They want to control your narrative. Marianne blinked. Control my narrative? Gwen nodded, folding her hands neatly. This isn't about debt, it's about guilt. They're trying to guilt you back into the role they built for you. Caretaker, fixer, financial cushion. Marianne's mouth went dry. The way Gwen spoke, so measured, so sure. It was like she'd read the blueprints of Marianne's entire life in a single glance. They want to frame your boundaries as betrayal, Gwen continued, to punish you for stepping away. What do we do? Marianne asked. We defend, Gwen replied. There are no signed agreements, no contracts. You're protected. If you wanted, we could countersue. Harassment, emotional distress, maybe even defamation. Marianne shook her head before Gwen could finish. I don't want revenge. I want distance. A clean line. No return address. Gwen studied her for a long second, then nodded. Then we make this disappear. Quietly. Thoroughly. By the time Marianne left Gwen's office, the wind had picked up. The streets were busy with the late afternoon shuffle of commuters, but Marianne walked as if the world had slowed to her pace. She felt stripped, exhausted, but oddly clear. They hadn't just tried to guilt her. They'd tried to rewrite the story, to make her the villain in the very tale she had written with her own hands, her own sacrifices. That evening, she opened her closet and pulled down a cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside, photo albums, birthday cards, old notes in Olivia's handwriting. Thanks for everything, Mom. I love you. She held one for a moment, then placed it back with care, not in anger, just removal. She didn't need reminders of the character she was no longer willing to play. Then she packed. Not with panic, not even with sadness, but with a quiet resolve that felt almost sacred. Seattle wouldn't fix everything, but it would be hers. By the next morning, she had taped shut 4 boxes and taken down the calendar Olivia had made for her 5 years ago. She donated half her books, 3 coats, and the guest room linens no one had used in months. She set aside 1 lasagna pan, the one she hadn't touched since that night. She stared at it a while, then dropped it gently into the donation box. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Olivia. We need to talk. I know things got out of hand. Please, can we meet? Marianne didn't reply. She had said everything already, in silence, in signatures, in a decision made not in anger, but in the quiet echo of clarity. Instead, she typed 1 line. I hope one day you become the daughter I used to believe in. And for the first time in decades, she turned her phone off, not to escape, but to breathe. The apartment felt lighter, almost hollow, but in a way that promised possibility. Marianne stood in the living room, surrounded by boxes, some sealed, others waiting. Her gaze drifted across the walls, the framed photos she hadn't yet taken down. Most featured Olivia. Graduations, birthdays, one of her wedding day. Marianne fixing the veil with careful fingers. She stepped closer to it, eyes narrowing, not in nostalgia, but in recognition of a truth she had ignored too long. She removed the photo from the wall and placed it face down in the donation pile. Later that evening, she received an alert from Gwen. No response filed. Your case is secure. They're backing off for now. The relief wasn't immediate. It arrived slowly, like sunrise in winter, subtle, reluctant, but steady. Marianne didn't celebrate. She cleaned, not a desperate purge, but a deliberate one. Every cabinet, every drawer. She emptied the family junk drawer. Menus, keys to long-gone storage units, old receipts from furniture bought when Olivia moved into her first apartment. She shredded every document she no longer needed, tossing the strips into black trash bags like a ritual. In the guest room, untouched for over a year, she stripped the bed, folded the floral quilt, and packed it neatly. Underneath the bed, a small cardboard box caught her attention. She pulled it out slowly. Inside were stacks of sealed cards, birthday and holiday envelopes she had sent after Olivia and Marcus moved into their new house. All still sealed, all unopened. Marianne sat on the floor, the weight of the box in her lap. Her own handwriting stared back at her. To my baby girl, to my favorite person, to the one I'd do anything for. They hadn't even been opened. She didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because there was something deeper now, something harder and clearer than sadness, a recognition. A final click of understanding that this wasn't about what she'd done wrong. It was about what they had taken for granted. By midnight, the kitchen was last. She moved through it with practiced hands, setting aside dishes to keep and those to leave behind. When she reached the lasagna pan, the same one from that Sunday, she hesitated. She ran her fingers along the smooth edge, remembering how tightly she had clutched it on that porch. How warm it had been, how cold she had felt. She carried it to the trash bin, lifted the lid, and let it go. There was no ceremony, no anger, just the sound of glass meeting plastic and the quiet that followed. A release. She closed the lid and returned to her packing. This wasn't just about moving cities. This was about moving on. Seattle greeted Marianne with mist and morning light. The apartment was smaller than her old one, but brighter. 2 wide windows facing the water, pale wood floors, and a kitchen that didn't hold the ghost of Sunday dinners. It smelled faintly of salt and possibility. No shared calendars on the fridge, no cards waiting unopened, just space. She furnished it slowly. 1 soft gray couch, a reading lamp, a desk by the window, no dining table. She didn't need one. Her meals were simple now. For one, cooked without obligation. She still made lasagna sometimes, but smaller, in a single-serving dish she'd bought at a thrift store. Most Sundays she baked something, scones, cinnamon rolls, cornbread, something warm to remind her that she still could. That comfort didn't have to be transactional. Her new job started quietly. Remote meetings, onboarding documents, polite introductions over Zoom. Her team was respectful, efficient, and didn't expect anything more than her best work. It was freeing. No one asked about Olivia. No one looked at her like she was anything other than competent. One Thursday evening, as she walked back from the corner bookstore where she'd joined a book club, her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number, but the tone was unmistakable. "I'm sorry. We needed help, but I know we didn't deserve it this way." Marianne stared at the screen. No pleading, no guilt woven into guiltlessness, just a passive surrender. It didn't sting like she expected. It felt small, as if it belonged to a chapter she'd already finished. She typed slowly, "I hope one day you become the kind of daughter I used to believe in." Then she turned the phone off again, this time not out of defiance, but protection. The next morning, she stood in line at the bank. Her last errand, her last tether. "I'd like to close this account," she said, handing over her ID. The teller nodded, clicking away at her keyboard. "Would you like to open a new one?" Marianne paused. "Yes." "Name on the account?" She hesitated for just a second, then smiled. "C.M. Rivers," she said clearly. It was her mother's maiden name. The woman who raised her with calloused hands and a quiet fire. The name no one had ever taken from her. The teller nodded, slid the form across. "Welcome to your new start." Marianne stepped outside into the Seattle drizzle and inhaled. The air was cool, sharp, with the scent of the river and something else. Freedom. Not loud, not grand, but real. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Mornings in Seattle had a rhythm all their own, quiet, thoughtful, often wrapped in gray clouds like a lullaby too stubborn to end. Marianne found herself walking along the waterfront most days before work, her thermos of coffee in hand, the mist curling through her hair. The air here didn't carry the weight of memory. It smelled of fresh starts and tides that didn't wait for anyone. Her new apartment didn't echo the past. There were no drawers full of other people's bills, no notes scrawled in her daughter's once-cherished handwriting, no pictures hanging like contracts of obligation. Instead, she filled her space with books, plants, soft rugs, and silence, the kind she chose, not the kind that settled like a ghost. At the book club, she found herself laughing, genuinely. Janice, a retired biology teacher with a sharp wit, insisted Marianne try paddleboarding. "You need to fall at least once before you know it's worth it," she'd said. Marianne, who hadn't fallen or allowed herself to, for years, agreed. She did fall, twice, and laughed harder than she had in decades. The muscles in her face ached from it, a strange relief after so many years of bracing. Her coworkers checked in occasionally, mostly through email. Her new manager complimented her attention to detail, her ability to lead quietly but decisively. No one called her mom. No one expected her to fix anything that wasn't in a spreadsheet. Then one morning, another email from Gwen. Subject, update short, clinical, Wesley indicted. Talia and Darla under formal investigation. Financial misrepresentation linked to multiple personal accounts. Your case has been dropped. No further response filed. Marianne stared at the screen once, twice, then deleted the message. No smile tugged at her lips. No tears welled. It was just space. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room she hadn't realized was sealed. That afternoon, she went back to the bank and closed the last joint account she'd left open as a backup. The woman behind the desk asked if she wanted to transfer the funds elsewhere. No, Marianne replied. I'd like to donate it. All of it. To a charity. She nodded. Women starting over. Housing, education, anything that helps them walk away when they need to. The woman blinked. That's incredibly generous. Marianne's voice was calm. It's overdue. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, brief and gold, casting the city in a wash of light. Marianne stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, face tilted upward. She wasn't healed. She wasn't whole, but she was free. And for the first time, she knew the difference. Later that week, while browsing the shelves at the local bookstore, Marianne's hand paused on a slim volume titled Reclaiming Quiet. The cover was simple, a single leaf floating on still water. She picked it up out of instinct more than interest, flipped through a few pages, and stopped at a line that read, Some people will only love you when you're giving. That's not love, that's leverage. She bought the book. At home, curled in her reading chair with the river blinking silver outside her window, she underlined that sentence, not because she needed to remember it, but because she never wanted to forget again. That evening, she made herself lentil soup. Nothing fancy, just warm and grounding. As the pot simmered, she pulled out her notebook. Not the one she used for budgeting or schedules, but the one she had started a week ago, titled simply, The After. Each night, she wrote something in it. Not a journal, not a list of grievances, just truths. I am not cruel for walking away. I am not broken for needing to. I am still allowed to love myself even if they didn't. The doorbell rang just after 8 p.m. That was unusual. Marianne approached cautiously. Through the peephole, a young man in a navy courier jacket, envelope in hand. She opened the door a crack. Delivery for Ms. C.M. Rivers, he said. She signed. He left. She opened the envelope slowly, heart thudding with an instinctive tension she hadn't felt since leaving her old life. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no letterhead, typed plainly. Talia and Marcus have filed for bankruptcy. All previous claims have been withdrawn. No further action will be taken. This is not a legal notice, only a courtesy notification. No signature, just facts. Marianne folded the paper, placed it in the drawer beside her reading chair, and closed it softly. No reaction rose, not anger, not satisfaction, just a sigh she hadn't known she was holding. They were gone from her life, by their own undoing, and she didn't feel guilty. The next morning, she returned to the paddleboard. Janice waved from the dock as Marianne pushed off. The river was calm, the sun shy behind a screen of clouds. She stood slowly, balancing better than last time, the board rocking beneath her feet. For a moment, she just floated. The current pulled gently beneath her, the breeze tugging at her sleeves. Below, the water reflected nothing but sky, weightless, not because she had nothing left, but because she had let go of everything that wasn't hers to carry anymore. By the time autumn settled over Seattle, Marianne had grown into her new life like it was always meant to be hers. She had routines now. Not obligations, but choices. Morning walks, book club on Tuesdays, fresh flowers from the market every other Friday. She smiled more, not at anyone in particular, but just because. She hadn't spoken to Talia in months. Occasionally, her mind would drift back to the unopened cards, the sealed envelopes Olivia had never even cared to slit open. At first, that memory burned. Now, it only lingered like an echo, sharp but distant. One Friday afternoon, she received an email from Gwen. Subject line, FYI only. The body contained a link to a news article. Local couple investigated for financial fraud, family conflicts cited in allegations. Marianne didn't click the link. She didn't need to. Later that night, she opened the donation box she had kept tucked in her hall closet. It contained the few things she hadn't had the heart to let go of completely: her wedding ring, one of Talia's baby shoes, and a small stack of photos. She picked up the top one, a picture of her and Talia at a pumpkin patch years ago. Talia was maybe 6, cheeks flushed, gripping Marianne's hand with both of hers. That little girl had once believed her mother could fix anything, and Marianne had believed she should. She pressed the photo against her chest for a moment, closed her eyes, and let herself grieve. Not just the loss of Talia, but the loss of the story she had spent her whole life telling, that a mother's love was supposed to be bottomless, tireless, unearned. But even wells run dry, and when they do, what's left isn't bitterness. It's clarity. She placed the photo back in the box, sealed it, and labeled it not with dates or names, but with one word: past. The next day, she brought it to a local women's shelter and handed it over. They didn't ask questions. They just thanked her. She walked away lighter. That evening, Marianne stood at her window, a cup of tea in hand, watching the river shimmer in the golden wash of sunset. The city hummed below her, but her apartment remained still, a sanctuary of her own making. She turned off the lights and let the room fill with shadows and quiet. Not loneliness, solitude. There was a difference, and finally, she understood it. The first postcard came just after Thanksgiving. It was addressed to C.M. Rivers and bore no return address. Just a photograph of a lake somewhere in Oregon, and 5 words in neat, careful script. "I thought of you today." Marianne turned the card over. No signature, no clue, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. Talia's. She stared at it for a long time, fingers grazing the glossy edge, the quiet audacity of its arrival, a crack in the quiet she had so carefully curated. It was not an apology. It wasn't even an attempt at reconnection. It was a breadcrumb. She placed it on the kitchen counter and made tea. She didn't cry. She didn't call. She didn't throw it away. She just left it there, like you might leave a forgotten dish in the sink. Not because you planned to clean it, but because you couldn't be bothered to care yet. 2 weeks later, another postcard, this time from Arizona, a desert scene, red rock and golden sky. "The sunsets here remind me of those nights on the porch, remember? Still unsigned." Marianne placed it next to the first one. She didn't reply. The messages kept coming. Montana, Utah, New Mexico, each one carried a slice of nostalgia and none of the accountability. It was as if Talia was trying to build a bridge using only shadows of memory, hoping that Marianne would forget the foundation had been bombed to dust. One morning, as she opened the latest card, this one from a snowy town in Colorado, Marianne noticed something new. The handwriting had changed slightly. Not enough for a stranger to catch, but enough for a mother to know. It wasn't Talia's, it was Darla's. The realization hit with an icy clarity. This wasn't just a daughter fumbling toward reconciliation. It was manipulation, a new tactic, another narrative. Marianne stood at her kitchen window, card in hand, watching the river rise and fall. The city below moved on in its rhythm, unaware of the game being played above its streets. She picked up every postcard, stacked them in order, and slid them into an envelope. She wrote no return message, just one line on the front of the envelope: "Return to sender." Then she dropped it in the mailbox and walked away. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt clean, untouched by the guilt they kept trying to slip into her pocket. It was the visit that never came, the one they hoped to orchestrate without ever showing up honestly, and she refused to host ghosts. The postcard stopped after that. No more curated memories, no more feigned sentiment. Silence returned, not the uneasy kind that hovers like a pause too long, but the restful sort that settles into your bones like peace. Marianne embraced it. Her days became hers again. In December, Seattle dressed itself in twinkling lights and wet streets. Marianne found herself walking through Pike Place Market, a cinnamon bun in hand, laughing quietly at a trio of carolers singing too loudly and too off-key. She wasn't searching for anything, just living. At home, she decorated a small pine tree with white lights and paper ornaments she cut herself. No family heirlooms, no gifted trinkets, just simple things that didn't come with expectation. One afternoon, Janice dropped by, unannounced. "Thought you might need something stronger than tea," she said, holding up a bottle of mulled wine. They spent the evening on Marianne's couch, laughing, reminiscing, not once mentioning children or regrets. It wasn't that those topics were forbidden, they just weren't necessary. "You ever think she'll show up?" Janice asked gently. Marianne swirled the wine in her glass. "She already did, in those cards. Or rather, her absence did." "You'd know what to say if she knocked?" Marianne didn't hesitate. "Yes. Would you let her in?" Marianne stared at the flickering candles on her windowsill, their reflections dancing across the glass. "I might open the door," she said slowly, "but I wouldn't let her step past the threshold until she left the manipulation outside." Janice nodded, unsentimental. "Fair." They clinked glasses. That night, long after Janice left and the streetlights bled gold into the fog, Marianne sat in her chair by the window, her book open but unread in her lap. She thought about the question Janice had asked and her own answer. Truth was, she didn't need Talia to return anymore. Not with apologies, not with regrets. What she wanted wasn't reconciliation. It was recognition, an acknowledgement that she had been real, her love had been real, and it had deserved better. But she had stopped holding her breath for it, and in letting go, she had made room for something greater, herself. She looked around her apartment, the soft couch, the tiny tree, the walls free of old photographs, and felt no hollowness, only freedom. A life no longer measured by how much she gave away, but by how fully she chose to remain. Outside, a gust of wind swept along the river, scattering leaves like confetti. She didn't get up to shut the window. She let the cold in, just for a moment. It reminded her she was alive. The first voicemail came 3 days after New Year's. No caller ID, but Marianne recognized the cadence before the first full sentence. "Hi, Mom, I don't know what to say exactly. I guess I thought about you. A lot over the holidays." Pause. Breath. Measured hesitation. "I know things got messy. I know you're hurt. But I want to make it right. I really do. Can we talk?" Click. No apology, no ownership. Just a request couched in softness, as if kindness could erase everything. Marianne deleted it without saving. The second message arrived a week later, and then a third, each one carefully crafted, as though they were working from a script of emotional plausibility. "We miss you. Marcus asks about you." There's so much I didn't understand back then. By the fifth voicemail, Marianne noticed a pattern. Each message stopped just before accountability. Talia's voice always broke at the right moment, always pleaded in a way that used to make Marianne soften. But not this time. This time, she recognized the performance. One Sunday morning, she sat at her desk and wrote a letter. Not to send, just to write. "Dear Talia, I am not angry anymore, but I will not be manipulated into forgetting. You didn't just hurt me. You reduced me to a resource, a fallback plan, a silent sponsor of your comfort. You calculated my love like interest, and that is not love returned." She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it in the back of her notebook labeled "The After." She didn't need Talia to read it. She just needed to have said it. The next day, her apartment filled with the scent of fresh bread and rosemary. She was hosting her book club. Janice brought lemon tart. One of the younger women, Lauren, brought her 6-year-old daughter, who curled up on the couch with a coloring book and called Marianne Miss Rivers, in a voice so sweet it almost broke her. Not because it reminded her of what she had lost, but because it reminded her of what was possible. That night, Marianne added one more line to her notebook. "You can't rebuild from ruins if you keep trying to live inside them." She looked around her quiet apartment, bookshelves lit by string lights, a sink with just one dish in it, no echo of voicemail still hanging in the air, and felt something like reverence. She was alone, but never again empty. Marianne stood by her window one evening, watching the last of the winter light dissolve into the horizon. The phone sat on the kitchen counter, silent, but never quite invisible. It hadn't rung all week, and she hadn't checked the voicemail box again, not out of defiance, out of decision. Some voices didn't deserve entry anymore. Seattle moved gently into spring. Rain softened into mist, and snowdrops sprouted along the sidewalks like quiet resilience. Marianne filled her window boxes with herbs and planted tulips in a tin pail by the door. Small things, intentional things. Then came the letter. Real paper, handwritten. The envelope was thin, her name inked with care. It wasn't Talia's handwriting, but it wasn't unfamiliar either. Inside, a single page. Dear Marianne, you don't know me, but I've known of you for a long time. I'm Wesley's sister. I stayed out of things when everything went bad between you and Talia. I didn't think it was my place, but I wanted you to know. There are people who saw what happened, who knew what you gave, who know what it cost you. You were never crazy. You were never cruel. You were kind. Too kind. They're struggling now, yes, but not because of you. You stepped away to survive. That isn't abandonment. That's strength. Just thought you should hear that from someone not trying to get anything from you. Angela Marianne reread the letter twice. Not for clarity, but for permission. Something inside her softened. Not toward Talia, not toward Wesley, but toward herself. She folded the letter and placed it gently in her notebook, next to the unsent one she had written to her daughter. They didn't cancel each other out. They coexisted. One born of hurt, the other of recognition. For the first time, Marianne didn't feel like she had to defend her side of the story. Someone else had seen it, said it, and that was enough. That Sunday, she sat on her small balcony with a book and a cup of tea, feet propped on a cushion, sun warming the side of her face. A neighbor's cat hopped the railing and settled at her feet without ceremony. She smiled. "You're not mine," she said aloud, "but you're welcome." The cat blinked slowly in approval and stayed. Marianne turned the page of her book, exhaled, and let the day continue without asking anything from her. She owed no one an answer. Not anymore. The thrift store on 8th Avenue wasn't where Marianne expected to feel anything close to peace, but it happened. Quietly, unexpectedly. Between a shelf of used ceramics and a wire rack of framed art no one had wanted the first time. She had gone there on a whim, not to buy, just to browse. But as she turned a corner, her eyes landed on a small, hand-thrown bowl. Its edges were uneven, the glaze a soft blue-gray with a hairline crack down one side that had been sealed with gold. Kintsugi. She smiled despite herself. The art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making it more beautiful for having been broken. She bought the bowl. At home, she placed it on the shelf in her kitchen, beside her salt jar and coffee canister, not as a symbol, not as a metaphor, just as something she found beautiful. Something once broken, now whole again. That night, Marianne made a list. Not the kind she used to write for groceries or holidays or birthday gifts. This list was titled, Things That Hold Without Hurting. She started with the obvious. Warm tea in a cold room, the weight of a good book, soft socks fresh from the dryer, silence that doesn't need explaining. Then, slowly her pen moved toward the intangible, boundaries respected, kindness with no transaction, a name that feels like your own, being alone and not afraid. The list stretched across 3 pages before she stopped. She didn't cry. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. The kind of steadiness she hadn't known in years, one not built on making others comfortable, but on making herself whole. The next morning, she added one more item to the list, letting go of who they wanted you to be. That afternoon, she walked to the post office with a small package wrapped in brown paper. No return address, no name on the note inside, just a copy of a book she had loved recently and the inscription, "Sometimes breaking away is the only way to become." She mailed it to Angela. She didn't expect a reply, but sending it felt like something right, like placing a stone where a wound used to be, not to forget, but to honor what had healed. A week later, a small envelope arrived with Angela's return handwriting on the back flap. Marianne opened it without hesitation. Inside was a short note. "I got the book. I cried through the first chapter, then underlined the second. Thank you. You didn't have to, which made it mean more. If you ever want to visit the coast, I have a guest room. No pressure, just peace. Angela Marianne folded the note with care and placed it inside her notebook. Not the after one, but a new one she'd started titled simply, Now. Angela's letter wasn't a lifeline. It was a hand extended with no expectation, a gentle offering that said, I see you. And for Marianne, that was more than enough. She didn't plan a trip, not yet, but she looked up the coastal town online and bookmarked a few inns, just in case. Instead, she went about her week with a quiet warmth in her chest. She repotted her herbs. She bought a new pair of walking shoes. She even applied for a part-time mentorship role at a local nonprofit, helping women re-enter the workforce. It wasn't out of obligation or loneliness. It was because she had knowledge now, hard-earned, paid for in heartbreak, and she wanted to put it to use where it might mean something. During her first volunteer shift, she sat across from a woman named Belinda, who had left a bad marriage with nothing but a duffel bag and a toddler. I used to be someone, Belinda whispered, more to herself than to Marianne. Marianne smiled softly, folding her hands. You still are. You just haven't met her again yet. Belinda blinked at her, then nodded, eyes shining. That night, Marianne walked home under a wide moon, the streets quiet and slick from earlier rain. As she turned the key in her apartment door, she paused, not because of fear, but from the stillness. It didn't feel empty inside anymore. It felt ready. She stepped in, set her keys down, and lit a candle on the counter. The bowl she'd bought from the thrift shop sat in its usual spot, glazed crack gleaming faintly in the warm light. She touched its edge gently, then whispered aloud, things that hold without hurting. And she knew now, she was one of them. Spring deepened. Marianne found herself measuring time not in months or holidays, but in subtle changes. The scent of the river as it warmed, the way light pooled on her kitchen floor in the early morning, the first time she didn't flinch at the sound of a voicemail beep. It had been months since she'd heard from Talia. The silence was neither sharp nor sweet. It was simply space. And space was something Marianne had learned to live inside without apology. At the nonprofit, she began leading weekly workshops on budgeting and independence. Not just numbers, but boundaries, emotional labor, the cost of constantly being the strong one, things she knew in her bones. One woman, Marta, stayed behind after class one evening. Her voice was quiet, strained. What if they keep asking for more, even after you've said no? Marianne looked at her, really looked. Then you say no again and again until they stop asking or until you stop answering. But what if it's family? Marianne gave a soft, knowing smile. Especially if it's family. Marta stared at her for a long moment, then finally exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. Marianne walked home that night with tired feet and a full heart. Not proud, exactly. Something deeper. Something like alignment. Like being finally in sync with who she had always meant to be, before life turned her into everyone else's cushion. That weekend, she hosted her first dinner party since moving to Seattle. It wasn't elaborate, just Janice, a few new friends from the center, and a young couple from her building who had lent her a screwdriver the week she moved in. She made lemon rosemary chicken and a simple berry crumble, no lasagna. That dish had been left behind, with everything it represented. As laughter filled her apartment and wine glasses clinked gently against plates, Marianne felt something settle in her chest. Not nostalgia, not longing. Belonging. Not to a family that used her, but to a life that honored her. Later that night, when the last guest left and her apartment went quiet again, she didn't feel the ache of absence. She felt the glow of presence, her own, steady and unyielding. She washed the dishes slowly, hands warm in the water, and whispered to herself, I was never too much. I was just with people who asked for too little in return. A month later, a manila envelope arrived at Marianne's door. No return address, just her name, written in rushed, uneven strokes. She hesitated before opening it. her fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from muscle memory. Inside, a bundle of documents, some photocopied, others handwritten, financial statements, bank transfers. One note in blue pen, barely legible. I didn't know what he was doing, I swear. I never meant to hurt you this way. Please believe me. Talia Marianne sat down slowly. Each page revealed layers she hadn't asked for. Wesley had funneled money through joint accounts, using Marianne's past gifts to legitimize questionable transactions. Talia's name was on most of them. It was evidence, not an apology, and Marianne understood something crystal clear then. This wasn't repentance. It was self-preservation. They were in trouble. Legal, financial, maybe worse. And now, finally, Talia needed something more than just her mother's silence. She needed cover. Marianne closed the envelope gently and placed it on the table, careful not to let her tea spill. She didn't shake. She didn't curse. She didn't call Gwen. She didn't have to. Because the thing about living your life honestly, about removing the hands from your pockets and the guilt from your spine, is that when ghosts show up, you don't owe them hospitality. You owe them the door. She picked up a pen and wrote a single line on a fresh sheet of paper. I wish you healing, but I no longer owe you mine. She folded it, slid it into the envelope, and sealed it with firm, steady fingers. That evening, she walked to the mailbox, dropped it in, and didn't look back. Not because she was cold. Because she was done. When she returned home, her phone blinked with a new voicemail. She didn't check it. Instead, she added one last item to her list. The courage to love yourself more than someone else's need. She placed the notebook on her windowsill, where the evening light caught its worn cover. Then she turned on soft music, poured a glass of wine, and curled up with a book. The river outside shimmered, and Marianne exhaled. A woman untethered but never unrooted. The bank clerk looked up from the screen and smiled politely. Just confirming. You want the name on the account to be C.M. Rivers? Marianne nodded, her voice calm. Yes, that's correct. She'd practiced the moment in her head, how it might feel to say it aloud. The name wasn't new, it was old, an inheritance. Not of money, but of meaning, her mother's maiden name. A name that had never asked her to be small. The papers were signed quickly, no ceremony, just clean, efficient lines. As she left the bank, the summer air was warm, fragrant with sea salt and blooming magnolias. She walked without hurrying, feet steady, posture tall. Something about the act, the legal, mundane, unpoetic act, had grounded her in a way therapy never could. She hadn't just opened a new account, she had closed a chapter. Seattle pulsed around her, the clang of trolley bells, the hush of waves kissing the dock, the faint strum of a street guitarist playing something almost like jazz. The city didn't know her story. It didn't ask for her past. It just let her be. She stopped at her favorite cafe and ordered an iced espresso. The barista smiled. Name for the order? She paused, then smiled back. Rivers. It was the first time she'd said it in public. Something shifted in her chest. Not a break, a realignment. At home, she updated the name on her mailbox and left a small potted succulent by the door with a handwritten sign. Take one if you need a bit of green today. Later, she sat by the window with her tea and the soft hum of music playing in the background. The shadows on the wall stretched long and gold. She opened her notebook, the one now simply titled Self, and wrote, I am not what they called me, not what they demanded, not even what they remember. I am what I answer to. And today, I chose to answer to myself. She leaned back in the chair, letting the words settle. Not as declarations, but as truths she no longer needed to prove. Outside, the sun dipped low over the water. Inside, Marianne Rivers. No longer just someone's mother, someone's safety net, someone's silent sacrifice. Breathed in the fullness of her own name, and it felt like home. Weeks passed with the rhythm of someone finally unburdened. Marianne's days were soft but full. Mentoring at the nonprofit, weekend hikes with Janice, quiet mornings spent journaling by the window with a second cup of tea. She no longer woke up checking her phone, no longer braced herself for manipulation disguised as family. Then one morning, a short email appeared in her inbox. Subject, no defense filed. From Gwen Lockish. That was it. No pleasantries, no explanation, just the end. Talia and Wesley hadn't responded to the final legal motion. Their claim, bloated with entitlement, dissolved in silence. The case was dismissed. Officially. Entirely. Marianne read the email twice, then closed her laptop. She didn't feel victorious. She felt released. That afternoon, she took herself to a bookstore tucked in a quiet street corner she'd passed a dozen times but never entered. The smell of old paper and lavender oil hung in the air, soft and grounding. She wandered the shelves, running her fingers along spines, stopping only when a title caught her eye. The Art of Holding Still. She smiled, took it to the counter, and bought it without reading the back. At home, she placed the book beside her others, then opened her closet, not to clean, but to choose. From the back, she pulled out a suitcase. She wasn't running. She wasn't escaping. She just wanted to see the coast. Really see it. She booked a 3-night stay in Angela's town, sent a short message. "Hi, Angela. I took your offer. If that guest room's still available, I'd love to come breathe in the ocean for a bit. No pressure, just now felt like the right time. Mar." Angela responded within the hour. Doors open, tea's warm. Come as you are. Marianne packed lightly. Books, walking shoes, the thrift store bowl wrapped in a scarf. Not because she needed it, but because it had once reminded her she could be whole again. And now, she simply wanted to bring that wholeness with her. She didn't leave a forwarding address. She didn't post a thing online. She just locked her apartment, dropped the keys in her bag, and stepped into a journey not marked by loss, but by deliberate, self-chosen steps. Steps only she could name. The train ride to the coast was slow and winding, the kind that invited reflection more than distraction. Marianne sat by the window, a paperback open in her lap but unread. Outside, the world passed in gentle blurs. Pine trees, sleepy towns, the silver shimmer of rivers cutting through fields. She didn't check her phone, didn't scroll. She simply watched. Angela's town was smaller than she'd imagined, with cobbled streets and painted storefronts that felt untouched by time. The air smelled like salt and warm bread, and the sea roared just beyond the hill, a constant hush against the edges of everything. Angela greeted her at the door with open arms and no questions. Marianne stepped into the guest room, a small space with floral curtains, a writing desk, and a view of the ocean so wide it made her chest ache. Not from pain, from breath. That evening, they sat on the porch with mugs of tea. Angela spoke first, voice soft. "You look different." Marianne tilted her head, amused. "Older?" "No." Angela smiled. "Lighter." Marianne nodded slowly. "That's because I am." They didn't talk about the past much, only where it touched the present. Angela shared stories of her teaching days, of the book club she co-hosted at the Lighthouse Cafe. Marianne told her about the mentorship program, about the thrift store bowl, about learning to sleep with both eyes closed. The next morning, Marianne woke early and walked down to the beach barefoot. The sand was cold, wet from the tide, and the sky stretched in shades of gold and bruised lavender. She stood at the edge of the water, letting the waves touch her toes, and whispered the name she now answered to. Marianne Rivers. Not to declare it, to affirm it. Each syllable carried weight, but not burden. Identity, not obligation. She pulled the thrift store bowl from her tote bag, knelt down and let seawater fill it halfway. She didn't pour it out, just held it. This was her ritual now, not penance. Presence. Marianne stayed longer than she planned. 3 nights turned into 6. She spent her days walking coastal trails, letting wind whip through her hair and the sound of gulls become a kind of music. At night, she journaled beside the window, the sea's rhythm keeping time with her pen. Angela left her to her quiet, offering space instead of conversation. It was the kind of friendship Marianne hadn't known she needed, one rooted in respect rather than rescue. On the last day, she returned to the beach with a small object wrapped in cloth, the lasagna spoon, one of the only things she had brought from her old kitchen, a relic not of love, but of overextension. The utensil had served countless meals, most of which she had cooked through exhaustion, guilt, or obligation. She knelt by the tide and dug a shallow trench, not to bury it, but to let it go. With the waves lapping near, she whispered softly, "This fed them, but it starved me." And she left it there, letting the tide claim what it would. Back at Angela's, she packed with care but no sentimentality. Her suitcase was lighter than when she arrived, though she had added 2 books and a hand-knit scarf Angela had insisted she take. At the station, they embraced once. "Come back any time," Angela said, her voice warm but without expectation. "I will," Marianne replied, and meant it. On the return train, the landscape no longer blurred. It expanded. Seattle greeted her like an old friend, familiar but different, perhaps because she was different now. At home, she unpacked slowly, putting things away with intention. The thrift store bowl went back in its spot, now holding a single white seashell. Her self-notebook reopened to a new page. At the top, she wrote, "Things I've made room for," and below that, in slow, careful script, "Silence that heals, names that honor, friendships without transaction, decisions that center peace, a future not handed to me but chosen." She paused, then added one final line, "Me." That evening, she cooked a simple meal, roasted vegetables, a grain salad, lemon tea, enough for one, enough for her. As she ate, the sun dipped below the skyline, casting her small apartment in golden quiet. She didn't feel alone. She felt intact. And as she placed her dishes in the sink and looked out over the city that had given her both distance and clarity, Marianne Rivers, daughter, woman, survivor, self, smiled. She had chosen her name. She had chosen her life. And finally, it had chosen her back.